Hi everybody and welcome back to Zwift. Today I'm bringing you a video from a recent ladder race for my team WCC. Ladder races are a team event where every finishing position scores points, with more points on offer for the higher you finish, so every position counts. Today's race had it all, from an excellent breakaway to a relentless climb, and of course a tough sprint finish. Okay, so let's jump in and take a look at the course. The route for this race was Greatest London Loop, and as you can see from the course profile, there's not a lot going on until you get around 2/3 of the way through the race. At this point, the elevation really starts to heat up, and it even further increases once you hit the Leith Hill. Those familiar with Zwift racing will know that the draft reduces when you're going up an incline. This is a perfect opportunity to attack your opponents and try and drop some of the slower or heavier riders in the group. As with most Zwift races, it's hard to tell how the race is going to go out the gate, so I put on a decent amount of wattage at the start to make sure that I don't get dropped. First couple of minutes of any Zwift race is just finding out how the other riders are going to race and just find yourself a good position within the pack. Okay, so we fast forward to the first moment of the race. At this point I'm sitting towards the rear of the pack, and we discussed prior to the race that Lee, our team member who's at the back currently, was going to potentially try to get off in front of the group early, as he's got less chance of doing well at the climb. As I see him moving through the group, I follow him, and then when he starts to accelerate away from the group, I also put in a bit of an effort to get out in front with him. I carry on my effort past him and hope that he'll get on my wheel and we can progress and get away from the rest of the group. As the situation develops, one of their riders gets onto my wheel and another is trying to get on as well. At this point I start to realise that I'm dropping too many of our team and there's no point really progressing with this attack, so I ease off the power. At this point I realise that the gap between me and their rider and the rest of the field has actually opened up, so all we need to do is the same amount of watts as the person on the front of the peloton and we'll keep the gap the same. At this point I'm quite confident that I can beat their rider over the course of the race, so I just keep the power on but nothing too crazy. On this next incline I wanted to do a little test and see if the breakaway was worth pursuing, so I wanted to put an effort in on this hill and see if their rider was able to stick with me. He was able to match my effort easily and actually blitzed past me on the way up the hill. Due to every position mattering when it comes to ladder racing, I'm actually a bit nervous now that the breakaway is not the right move. With how strong this rider was on the hill, I'm starting to feel like he'll beat me on the incline later on the course. At this point, I think the best option is to fall back towards the rest of the group and then we can attack their team as a team. So my tactics have now shifted. I'm going to let him lead and I'll sit in his draft. I'm hoping that because we're doing less watts, the group will come back together. I make a snap decision on this next hill that when I get to the crest I'm going to mount an attack. The reason for this is that I think that he may be strong on the hills due to being a lighter rider, and I may be able to overpower him when it comes to raw power on the flats. Again, he matches my attack with ease and brings it back. These tests have made up my mind for me, and my goal now is to try and bring the group back together. Okay, so the group comes back together and Mark seizes the opportunity to go for a breakaway. I let him go and just watch and react to the opposition. The gap that he's formed is large enough and it looks like the opposition are not going to try and bridge it. Our goal now is to sit on the front with these other riders and make sure that the pace doesn't increase too much. I want to give Mark every opportunity to extend the distance as much as possible, which gives us a great opportunity at taking first place in this race. Okay, I've skipped forward to the base of the climb, and as you can see our tactics for this race have worked so far. We've managed to give Mark a massive 1 minute 25 advantage when we've got to the base of this climb. At this point, you can see, if you look at the bottom of the leaderboard, that we've managed to drop 2 of their riders, and we've managed to keep pretty much all of ours within this front pack. At this point, unfortunately, we've lost Lee from our group, so now we've got 3 of our riders versus 3 of their riders. At this point, Mark's still 1 minute and 22 ahead of the rest of the group, so it's currently advantage us as we've got a rider out in front. We've kept the pressure on, and as you can see, 2 of their riders are starting to slip from this front pack. Continue hard on the front and keep pressing on. In our attempt to drop these 2 riders, we actually start to close the gap on Mark. At this point, it's a bit of a balancing act. Of course, it's better to drop these riders, but equally we don't want to close the gap on Mark and bring it all back together. As we get to Leith Hill and start the steeper part of this climb, we're in a great position where we've got 3 of our riders against 2 of their riders, and due to their riders seemingly being at the back of the pack during these climbs, I'm going to keep pushing on the power and hopefully force them to drop. As I'm riding up this climb, I'm paying attention to the distance between us and their rider at the back. I notice that he's starting to fall off the back and just keep the pressure on so that we can drop him. At this point, 2 of our riders are starting to leave the group. I decide that I'm going to activate my feather power up and try and keep with them and hopefully drop the remaining rider of their team. During this incline section and the relentless attacks up the hill, we've actually managed to decrease the gap between us and Mark. At this point, we've caught Mark, and I decide I'm going to take over and pull from the front. Start putting in a half decent effort as I want to try and cross that con barrier first. And that's it, we reached the top of the com in first place. As we've gone over the crest of the hill, it's left 2 of our riders and 1 of their riders. At this point, I've been trying to sit in the draft and take no pulls, but Alan starts to launch an attack, and unfortunately I'm not close enough to his wheel to follow it. I now start to lose sight of the riders in front of me. At this point, I think my race is over. What I didn't realise is I'm a heavier rider than their rider, and I actually managed to close the gap on the remainder of the decline. As we get to this short kicker upwards, I decide to launch my featherweight, and I'm going to put in a real surge to try and close that gap. Managed to close the gap to the opposition, and at this point we just take it steady till we get to the sprint finish. With 0.3 kilometers left to go, I know I need to launch my sprint soon, and I need to launch my sprint earlier than most people as I've not got a really high top level power. And I put in a blast of over 700 watts, hoping that I can increase the gap between me and the opposition. Unfortunately, he manages to stick to my draft and put out more watts per kilo and takes me on the final sprint. And that there is another ladder race complete. We managed to take the win on this one, and I think the crucial part of the race was the climb, where we managed to drop a significant number of their riders. Okay, see you in the next one.